Good morning. I made a bag out of leather and not everything went according to plan. It's probably obvious that I'm a huge fan of Bilbo's backpack given that I made an entire replica of it. I designed a smaller bag inspired by it because you can never have too many Bilbo baggins. I'll see myself out.
Let's make a Bilbo bag. Ends.
First up, the leaf.
I particularly like this detail, so I decided to make it the focal point. I traced around all the pattern pieces and used an X-Acto knife to cut them out. I dampened the leather and used a pencil to trace all of the tooling lines on. I've linked all the tools in the description. First, I used a swivel knife to carve all of the pattern lines into the leather. I used a bar grounder to texture in between all of the veins. And finally, used a stylus to tidy any areas that looked a little rough.
Next, the sides and bottom of the bag. Can we call it the bag end?
The sides and bottom of the bag consists of one long strap. I used a strap cutter to slice it, but it could be done with a metal ruler. I incorporated the details from the backpack's side pockets at the top of each side. While transferring the tooling pattern, I also marked out the stitch holes. I used the exact same method for tooling this leaf. The only difference is I used a bevel stamp around the outside of the leaf to help it pop forward. I still used the same bar grounder in the middle.
Next, the front.
For the front of the bag, I incorporated the scallop detailing from the backpack flap along the bottom. I used a swivel knife to carve them out, then a bevel stamp around the outside and the inside of each scallop. Then I used this pebble stamp to texture the insides.
Next, the back and top flap.
The top flap and the back of the bag are all one piece, which doesn't have any tooling. Not sure why I bothered to dampen it, but sometimes you're just in the zone. I did use the dampened leather to transfer the stitching and rivet holes, though.
And now the belt loops.
Lastly, the belt loops. I used a swivel knife, bevel stamp, and the pebble backgrounder to add all of the details.
If you're new here, my name's Alwyn. I'm a leatherworker. I make cosplay and fantasy accessories, so follow for nerdy shenanigans. Let's add some holes. Hobbit holes?
I used a hole punch and a mallet against a punching mat to punch out all of the rivet holes. I punched the holes in the decorative front leaf, the holes on the bag itself, and the holes to attach the belt loops to the bag. And then I punched out all of the holes for the stitching. I want to note that you need to match your hole size to whatever material you're stitching the bag up with. I've chosen to stitch my bag up with a strip of veg tan, so I'm punching a larger hole than indicated on the pattern. By now, my neighbors are probably annoyed enough to steal my spoons, so I better take a break from hammering.
Sackville Bagginses.
I'm using this magnetic clasp I got from Tandy to close the bag. I sliced the two slots with a knife, fed the top of the clasp through, placed the back plate, and then I used a very high-tech method of smudging it with the handle of my mallet to press it in place. I repeated the same steps for the other half of the clasp. Now, why didn't I put them on after dyeing? Girl, don't ask. I wasn't thinking. Then I used an edge beveler to round the edges of all of the pieces of leather.
It's time to color.
First, I oiled the leather with neat's foot to rehydrate it after the tooling process. The last bag I made, I waited until everything was stitched to dye the entire thing with an airbrush. I know not everyone has an airbrush, so to keep this project accessible, I'm doing things by hand. I'll admit an airbrush is way easier. I applied buckskin Phoebing's dye with a wool dauber. I was going for a shaded look, which is much harder to achieve without an airbrush, but it does look like it was made by a hobbit. Then I used a paintbrush to add darker brown to highlight various details. Once everything dried, I used my favorite tool, the cheapest paintbrush in the world, to apply leather finish to all the pieces. I used my lazy girl method of using an edge slicker in between every coat to smooth the edges down. Slicking is optional, but it gives a little bit of a cleaner result. Once the finish dried, I used Phoebing's antique paste in black and rubbed it into all of the carvings. Then I wiped off all of the excess and gave it a good buff. I used a light coat of finish to seal in the antique. I still have some more dyeing to do, so I saved the final coat of finish for later.
Now let's put it all together.
Now for stitching, I cut 2 narrow strips of veg tan. You don't want it to be so narrow that it'll break. I ran the strip under the tap for a minute to dampen it. I also moistened around the stitching hole areas so the bag can be pressed into shape. Now, leaving a bit of tail, I stitched my way around, pulling tight as I went. The corners are the trickiest part. Just keep molding everything into shape as you go. At this point, I realized I messed up.
Stupid fat hobbit.
I should have riveted before stitching. I decided to use domed rivets on the front because they look extra pretty. They do require a special rivet setter though.
I'm glad I went with domes. That's a nice, pretty look.
The top rivet goes through 2 layers of leather, and the bottom rivet goes through 3, so you need 2 different lengths. I used a regular rivet setter for this. Now that I've done the riveting I should have done prior to stitching, I tucked the lace ends under at the backside and pulled them tight. I came back later on and added a dab of glue for extra security, and then pressed the bag into a nice shape inside and out. I repeated the stitching process for the other half, and then made sure everything was molded nicely before setting it aside to dry completely.
Add the finishing touches.
For comparison, here's my previous bag, which I dyed using an airbrush after stitching. This time I have the rather more time-consuming task of dyeing the stitching with a paintbrush. Then I sealed everything, laces, antique and all, with a final couple coats of finish.
The bag is done.
And here's my finished Bilbo bag.
Baggins!
The pattern's available here if you want to make your own.
I regret to announce this is the end. I'm going now. Goodbye. All the pretty girls walk like this. Focus, you whore. I had the time of my life. Stop biting me. I really hope nobody can see me right now. Squirrel? I mean, I am insane. We know that. I saw a bear family yesterday. Baby bears were literally this big. Oh, can I pet that dog?